Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. Okay, so we're on the campaign trail, and the federal election is on, and Justin Trudeau has been talking about a $10 a day daycare and cutting costs so that parents can go to work, and it will help stimulate the economy and push Canada forward in a direction past what we have seen before, by giving more supports and subsidies, of course, to parents via early childhood education. He also is talking about paid sick time, that the government is going to provide a plan that will allow people to take time off for work because they're sick, that they don't have to choose to go to work if they are sick, that they can make the choice to stay home, they can make the choice not to infect their co-workers, and that they can make that choice and be able to get paid for it. They won't have to worry about the loss in paycheck, or the bills not getting paid, or the food not landing on the family's table because they took a day off from work because they didn't feel well, they felt ill. And Erin O'Toole, in his campaign so far, he's talking about economic recovery and providing jobs for people and providing affordable housing. And he's talking about how he wants to lift some of the restrictiveness of foreign investors into real estate, while at the same time ensuring that homes would get built for people who desperately need homes and are having trouble affording it. He's talking about relinquishing some of the federal real estate in order to make sure that some of these projects actually happen. He's talking about a massive stimulus program that will help put Canada back to work and help with the economics around that. And of course, Jagmeet Singh is talking about ensuring that people are safe, that they're able to go to work past the pandemic, that vaccines and things will be provided so that people can actually go to work safely, and ensure that people have good jobs, in most cases maybe union jobs, so that they can be assured the appropriate wages and hours in order for them to be able to support their families. Anime Paul, of course, is trying to promote a green economy, an economy that isn't dependent on oil and gas, it isn't dependent on fracking, it isn't dependent on mining carbon out of the ground in order to make money for Canada. She talked about that Alberta would be a good place to start by getting them to promote green initiatives that would stop them from digging up the tar sands even further. She's promoting rights according to climate change and helping people live better and helping our economy become green, helping us stop putting carbon into the air. Along with that, she wants to ensure that the women of Afghanistan that are now, as we may have seen in a news report, that a woman in Afghanistan was killed because she didn't want to wear a burqa. Anna May Paul wants to help those women. She wants to make sure that Canada still continues to give them supports as best we can in order to ensure that women in other countries have the rights, the same rights that they would have here in Canada, the right to vote, the right to education, the right to have a career if that's what they choose, a right for choice. We also heard Erin O'Toole yesterday talking about how the Conservative Party is a pro-choice party, that they want to support health care for women. They want to support all the rights and needs that women have. And he was avidly questioned about that. Our question, of course, is if Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives are truly wanting to support women's rights, support those issues that surround women, why are they being questioned so hardly about it, and why didn't the Conservatives do anything about that before that? And of course we also have been listening to the Liberal Party talk about how they want to promote more green, more innovations, and they bought a pipeline. The point is, we need to listen very closely to what their promises are, but at the same time, we need to examine what the actions that are as they follow up through on their promises. So let's listen right now to Justin Trudeau as he landed in Saskatchewan to give a brief talk about paid sick time, and we're going to hear from Erin O'Toole as he spoke from Ottawa yesterday about real estate and capital gains taxes and other issues that surround his platform for economic recovery.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean McEachern, and I'm the Liberal candidate in Regina, Wascana, and it's exciting to be here today with so many friends and supporters despite the rain. Saskatchewan Liberals are truly a resilient bunch, whether it's the weather or championing results for Canadians across this country. So thanks for joining us today. I, for one, love being at the airport, and not just when it means traveling, but for the love of aviation for me goes way back to my days being air cadets, getting my private pilot's license, and most recently spending a number of years on the Regina Airport Authority Board in the last couple of years as board chair. So my connection to the Liberal Party as well goes back to my youth, and I've been a member for 24 years, and most of that time in the background, working in the background with and learning from an exceptional member of Parliament, Ralph Goodale, and I'm excited to be running in his seat in this election. Though this is my first election as a candidate, I know this party has a proven track record of positive change for Regina and Saskatchewan. Even when working against what we call the blue wall in Saskatchewan, the Liberals are devoted to the benefit of all Canadians. And after 2 years of fighting the opposition, it's time to send some effective voices to Ottawa on behalf of Saskatchewan. So it's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce the Leader of the Liberal Party of Canada and the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau.
Thank you, Sean. Merci beaucoup. Quel plaisir de vous voir. Gotta love Saskatchewan summers. Gotta love summer in Canada where you can get a little bit of everything wherever you go. But it's been an absolutely amazing opportunity for me these past few days to get out there across the country and meet so many Canadians, but also get to stand with amazing candidates like Sean, Susan, and Caitlin. Let's give them another round of applause. It has really been an intense and challenging past 17 months for Canadians as people have really stepped up to be there for each other. And I think one of the first things I want to say to all of you is thank you. just look at each other. Look at what we've been able to do. We've been able to continue to fight through this pandemic, to move forward, to keep each other safe. Yes, we faced too many tragedies. We've seen too much sacrifice. But at the same time, we've shown the resilient strength that we know Canadians have, and particularly folks in Saskatchewan have, to be there for each other. So thanks for everything you've done. And even as we were in Ottawa, hunkered down like everyone was across the country, trying to figure out how to best serve Canadians and best help Canadians in this historic time, there were things that kept us going. Stories from communities across the country of the resilience, of the generosity, of the way people stepped up. But there was also something that kept me going in a personal level. And that was hearing directly from Canadians. And I want to take a moment right now to tell you about an extraordinary young woman named Betty. Betty is here with us today with her future Prime Minister t-shirt on. And I have to say, Betty wrote me a letter last November saying how important it was for her that we continue to do everything we can to protect our elders, protect folks who are most vulnerable from COVID-19, particularly her grandparents. And she was asking me to make sure that we get vaccines quickly and enough so we could protect everyone in Canada, but because all of us love our grandparents and we need to protect them too. That was last November, and I was very pleased when within a few weeks we started receiving vaccines in Canada, and because of the incredible work of so many people across the country and in our government, we were able to get enough vaccines in this country now to vaccinate everyone, and we're leading the world in vaccination rates. So Canadians have stepped up, and Canadians are continuing to step up, and we need them to continue to. If people still haven't gotten vaccinated, we need them to get vaccinated. We need you, as you're out there, to keep having those conversations about how we can continue to move forward, how we can continue to convince people to get those vaccines that are going to protect us all. Because yes, Betty's right. We have to protect our elders, our seniors. But you know who else can't get vaccinated yet? Betty can't, because she's only 9. And just as we all step up to protect our elders, as we have over the past many months, adults and grandparents across the country need to get vaccinated to protect Betty and my son Hadrian, who's 7, and all the kids across the country who want to get vaccinated but can't yet. That's what we do as Canadians. We stick up for each other. We're there for each other. And as we get through this pandemic, we have to continue to step up for each other. That was the announcement we made today, that we're going to keep workplaces and schools even safer. We're moving forward on investments in ventilation for small businesses, ventilation for community centers, and for schools right across the country, including here in Saskatchewan. We're also, that's a big piece of keeping people safe, we're also moving forward with 10 days of paid sick leave to make sure that if you catch a cold or if you have a sniffle, you don't have to make a choice between going into work or losing your paycheck. That's something we need to see right across the country. We're moving forward for federally regulated industries. We'll work with the provinces to make sure everyone is protected, because keeping Canadians safe needs to be job one for all of us. That's what motivated us from the very beginning. Because when a crisis hits, all you can do is fall back on your core values, on your reason for being, on the work that you do. And for the first 6 years of this government, we stayed focused on Canadians in so many different ways. Whether it was the first thing we did, which was raising taxes for the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class, or investing in the Canada Child Benefit for families that puts hundreds of dollars a month every month, tax-free, in the pockets of families who need it, and lifted over 400,000 kids out of poverty. We also stayed strong on fighting ever more ambitiously against climate change, understanding, unlike what some people in some parts of the country might think, there is no longer a choice between what's good for the environment and what's good for the economy. The only way to build good jobs and a strong economy for the future is to fight climate change and protect the environment at the same time. Les gens ici, en Saskatchewan, savent ça. Les gens à travers le pays savent ça. C'est juste les conservateurs, les politiciens conservateurs qui résistent encore à ce niveau-là. Mais nous, on va continuer de tenir fort. On va continuer d'être extrêmement ambitieux pour contrer les changements climatiques. But then, when this pandemic hit, we also had people's backs with supports for workers, supports for businesses, supports for families, because that was what our focus was. We knew the only way to build a strong economy, the only way to recover an economy from the shocks of COVID-19 is to invest in Canadians, to trust in Canadians to be able to rebuild. So when the Conservative Party of Canada continued to tell us that we needed to do less for Canadians, to do less for workers, to do less for seniors and for young people, we knew they just weren't wrong on a moral level. They were wrong on an economic level as well. Because the only way to build a strong economy is to make sure the people who make up that economy are strong as well. That's why we invest in Canadians. So whether it comes to ending with this pandemic, where we're going to continue to step up and trust science and encourage people to get vaccinated, where the Conservatives are again moving backwards. They don't want to tell their candidates that they have to get vaccinated. They also don't want to they're going to reverse our commitment to make sure that anyone on a plane or a train gets fully vaccinated, to keep everyone safe, including little girls like Betty who are getting on that plane. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep people safe and at the same time step up for a better future. So it's appalling to think of the fact that Erin O'Toole has committed that he is going to rip up the deal we signed with the government of Saskatchewan for $10 a day daycare for Saskatchewan families in the coming years. This is an investment not just in supporting families, but in supporting businesses and creating stronger economic growth. These are the things that the Conservatives don't understand when they promise to take Canada back. We know that going back isn't the way to go. We need to move forward for everyone, and that's what we're going to do together. So go knock doors. Go lean in on conversations with Canadians about how important this election is and the choices we're making now that will resonate for months and years and decades to come. This is a pivotal time in the life of our country, and we all get to pull together, to step up, to make our voices heard, and to move forward for everyone. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Merci mes amis.
Good morning. It's time to face the facts. We have a housing crisis in Canada. The supply of homes to own as well as to rent is not keeping up with our growing population. Foreign investors are also making the situation worse. They are bidding up prices, and in some cases, they're sitting on their investments and actually leaving homes empty while Canadians continue to search for affordable homes. L'offre de logement pour acheter ou pour louer ne suit pas la croissance de la population canadienne. Les investisseurs étrangers aggravent aussi la situation. Dans certains cas, ils s'assoient sur les investissements et laissent les maisons vides. Pendant ce temps, les Canadiens continuent de chercher des logements abordables. Even worse, we are learning through an inquiry in British Columbia that criminals are using Canada's housing market to stash the proceeds of crime. All of this throws up barriers to young families looking for more space for their kids, people who have found a good job and want to buy their first home, and retired empty nesters trying to downsize, none of whom can find the home they need. Canada's recovery plan will build more homes for Canadians and stop foreign money from pushing prices out of reach. First, we will implement our plan to kickstart the building of 1 million homes in the next 3 years. The Government of Canada is the largest landowner in the country. Much of the land the government owns could be developed for housing. We will release at least 15% of the buildings that belong to the federal government to build more homes. Tout d'abord, on va mettre en œuvre notre plan pour construire 1 million de logements au cours des 3 prochaines années. Le gouvernement du Canada est le plus grand propriétaire foncier du pays. Une grande partie des propriétés qu'il possède, le gouvernement pourrait se transformer en logement. Pour construire plus de logements, on va libérer au moins 15% des immeubles qui appartiennent au gouvernement fédéral. The Government of Canada also spends billions of dollars every year building transit. It's time to focus on transit-oriented development, ensuring that we build homes and increase density near transit. Our plan will provide more Canadians with a path to home ownership by making it easier for more families to get a mortgage. To do so, we will develop a new market in 7 to 10-year mortgage terms to provide stability both for first-time homebuyers and lenders. And we'll make improvements to the mortgage stress test and mortgage insurance rules to help Canadians afford homes. To stop foreign investors from sitting on empty homes and to get the proceeds of crime out of our housing market, we will ban foreign investors from purchasing homes here if they don't intend to live in or move to Canada. If people around the world want to invest in our great country, and I want that, we will instead encourage them to invest in purpose-built rental housing to provide more affordable options to Canadians. We'll provide incentives to get more rental housing built, and we will create a federal beneficial ownership registry for residential property and strengthen our laws to root out money laundering. Finally, Canada's Conservatives will never tax the capital gains on the sale of your principal home, something we know that the Liberals have been laying the groundwork to do. Pour empêcher les investisseurs étrangers de monopoliser les logements vides ou encore pour retirer les produits de la criminalité du marché immobilier, on va interdire aux investisseurs étrangers d'acheter des maisons au Canada, surtout s'ils n'ont pas l'intention de vivre au pays ou de s'y installer. Si des personnes veulent investir au Canada, on va les encourager à investir dans des logements locatifs construits à cet effet. On va pouvoir offrir des options plus abordables aux Canadiens. Aussi, on va fournir des incitatifs pour construire plus de logements locatifs. Et on va créer un registre de propriété effective fédérale pour les propriétés résidentielles, en plus de renforcer nos lois contre le blanchiment d'argent. Finalement, les conservateurs ne vont jamais imposer les gains en capital sur la vente de votre résidence principale, chose que les libéraux veulent faire. Our housing plan is comprehensive, and it will be effective. It will give all Canadians a chance to build the life they dream of, to live on a street with good neighbors, as my friends told me they do. If your family can afford to ignore the housing crisis, you have three parties to choose from. But if you want your government to secure a future where you and your family can afford a home that meets your needs, you have only one choice: Canada's Conservatives. Together, we will secure housing for Canadians. Ensemble, on va agir pour rendre les logements plus abordables. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions.
Mr. O'Toole, good morning. Travis Danner, CBC News. I know that you're going to likely get a lot of questions on your theme today, which is affordable housing, but I want to zoom out for a moment and talk a little bit about the past couple of days of your campaign. So far, your events have been fairly sanitized in controlled settings with supporters with you or with the media and a teleprompter like today. Are you going to consider what some may see as a safety bubble at some point and meet with Canadians that may challenge your stance on issues?
Well, Travis, I've spoken to more Canadians directly in this campaign than any of the party leaders through our telephone town halls, which are people bringing me their questions and concerns. We're going to be doing more. We've spoken to tens of thousands of people, as I did throughout the pandemic. We are also making sure we're following the strictest of health, sanitation, and distancing rules for an election that Mr. Trudeau called in the midst of British Columbia on fire, in the midst of a fourth wave, the deterioration and chaos in Afghanistan. We're in the Trudeau fourth wave election. We're going to have a combination of safe in-person events. I will be accountable to all Canadians, unlike Mr. Trudeau.
And you brought up the town halls. I know that you're going to have 2 virtual town halls this afternoon and early this evening. I want to ask you about that because you say that these town halls are to hear a range of questions and opinions, but we've been trying to get answers on the screening process for calls, and we haven't gotten many details on who can ask you a question and who can't. So far, no caller has been very critical of you. Can you confirm that your team is not only filtering in people that are supporters of you and filtering out those that oppose your stance on issues?
Well, this is a great opportunity to invite folks. I think we're going to be in New Brunswick and a few other places today in our telephone town halls to stay tuned. If the phone rings, we're calling people at large, and you can hear on the line, it's them speaking to me directly, asking the question that's on their mind. So the only thing is we don't want a lot of repetition. We want all issues canvassed because there's issues that all Canadians or families are facing. People can't afford the cost of living. Inflation's going up. Mr. Trudeau doesn't seem concerned about that. We want to talk about our 5 points in Canada's recovery plan. We have an exciting plan that will not leave behind a single Canadian family. We need to make sure the recovery from COVID is in all parts of the country and all sectors of the economy. And I look forward to speaking to thousands of more Canadians throughout this campaign.
Next question.
Abigail Beeman, Global News. I want to zone in on the affordable part of your affordable housing announcement. The incentives to provide rental housing are not that clear. I understand you're talking about 1 million homes, but can you talk more about specifically what you're doing for affordable housing and people who can't afford prices and the not enough volume for renters?
Well, we have a comprehensive plan that will actually fire up supply. We need to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years, and that means going from about 270,000 homes constructed per year and units up to over 340,000. To do that, we're going to release some property of the federal government, 15% of federal holdings for supply. We're going to encourage density with federal investments in transit. We need to get density up where the federal government's playing that role. We're going to give first-time home buyers more flexibility by fixing the mortgage stress test, but also giving longer terms so that people in their mortgage can get 7 or 10-year terms for certainty. And we're going to incentivize the construction of more purpose-built rental housing through a series of measures, including rollovers, to make sure there's more supply dedicated for rent. Because the one thing I'm hearing across the country is people can't keep up with the rising cost of living. Wages aren't going up. Canada's recovery plan is all about getting wages up, getting people working, tackling rising prices, and giving Canadians a break.
It's an interesting part of your plan in terms of the bringing transit infrastructure to where people live, but I don't understand how that's feasible to do within 3 years. You know, transit infrastructure promises sometimes take decades to fulfill. So can you explain how you can build new transit and increase density around it when you also have to, work with other partners to get that done within 3 years?
That's a great question. And some provinces are already doing this, including in Ontario. And one of the challenges with Mr. Trudeau, he's very good at announcements and tweets and photographs, very poor at delivering. In fact, only about 60% of the infrastructure dollars he announces, according to the parliamentary budget officer, gets out the door. We need to get those homes built. We need to invest in transit. We need to get this country moving after 15 very difficult months for families. And home construction and construction writ large is one of the most important drivers of our economy. So we're going to build this country again. We're going to have jobs and opportunity in all sectors. And our ambitious target of 1 million homes in the next 3 years, we have a comprehensive plan to get there, including density in housing, including changes to the mortgage rules, including freeing up federal lands. We're going to tackle this with more than just empty words like Mr. Trudeau.
Next question.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. Conservative Calgary MP Michelle Rempel-Garner has asked the federal health minister to look at the benefits or harms of poppers. This is a drug primarily used by men who have sex with men, with the possible outcome of establishing safe supply. She says the widespread use of poppers or alkyl nitrates hasn't received adequate study, partly because of the stigmatization of LGBTQ plus healthcare. So is the use of these drugs, which serve to relax muscles but have been pushed into the gray market, something your government would be open to?
Well, as you know, Michelle Rempel-Garner has been our lead on health issues throughout this pandemic. We've been holding the government to account on slow pace on approval of rapid tests, on vaccines. And I want members of the LGBTQ community to know if they want something looked at, if they're advocating for an issue, as Michelle has, as I have, as other members of our caucus have, we want to make sure that a federal government is responsive to the needs of all Canadians in all communities. It's also why we've been holding Mr. Trudeau to account for his broken promise, now over 5 years, to gay men with respect to the unfair, the discriminatory blood ban. So we will advocate, including asking for Health Canada to examine issues of concern to the LGBTQ community.
You've also inked conscience rights for doctors and nurses into your platform. Do you think it's acceptable for a doctor or for a nurse to refuse to provide a service like abortion, or even to have to refuse to refer patients to such a service?
Well, as you know, I'm pro-choice, and I want to make sure that access for women to those services are available across the country. It's an important right I will not only defend. I think we can also defend conscience rights for our incredible men and women on the front lines in our healthcare system. That is something we're going to do, particularly as we're studying expansions to assisted dying with some concerns about mental health. We can get the balance right, but let me be perfectly clear. As a pro-choice leader of this party, I will make sure that we defend the rights of women to make the choice for themselves with respect to their own health. Comme vous le savez, je suis pro-choix et je suis un chef pro-choix et je veux toujours défendre les droits pour les femmes de choisir pour elles-mêmes. Point final. C'est très important pour moi de dire ça. On va aussi examiner les droits de conscience pour nos infirmières et nos médecins, particulièrement avec l'augmentation, avec l'aide médicale à mourir. C'est possible de trouver une approche équilibrée, particulièrement avec la santé mentale. Mais je dois être très clair sur l'avortement. C'est important pour les femmes d'avoir accès de notions à l'autre.
Next question.
Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail, asking for a colleague. The government has to approve a new inflation mandate for the Bank of Canada later this year. Do you support maintaining the current flexible inflation targeting model, or would you prefer the central bank move to another monetary policy regime, such as average inflation targeting or a dual mandate that targets inflation and employment? Sorry.
Unlike Justin Trudeau, I'm concerned about monetary policy because I'm concerned about the housing crisis, the fact that hundreds of thousands of Canadians are having trouble keeping up with their bills, the rising costs, inflation at near 20-year highs doesn't seem to concern Mr. Trudeau. It concerns us, and that's why in our plan we actually will give Canadians a break. We will put pressure to get wages up and prices down. We want to give people a break in December with respect to the GST to also fuel purchases in bricks and mortar retail locations who are struggling. The biggest thing I hear from coast to coast is the rising cost of living. Canada's recovery plan is intended to tackle that.
Fair enough, but which of the two models do you prefer?
I prefer keeping inflation low, and the target of 2%, which is the current mandate, is one we should continue, because it can have economic growth and allow Canadians to keep pace with rising costs of living. This is a real issue facing families, and Mr. Trudeau doesn't concern himself with these issues because he doesn't understand the impact it has on single seniors, who are having trouble keeping up with rising costs, families trying to give their kids what they need. Small business owners have told me their suppliers are raising all costs. Inflation, for the first time in decades, is a risk under Mr. Trudeau, and he doesn't seem concerned by it. It is what drives me, fighting for affordability for families, for seniors. Let's get wages up and get pressure on prices down.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I'd like to ask you again about your affordable housing announcement today. So specifically, I'd like to zone in on this 15% of federally owned buildings. So paint me a picture. If I'm someone looking to rent a house, are you saying that I'm going to move into an old office building that's going to be retrofitted? I'd like to see how that's going to work, how that's affordable, and how that's feasible in 3 years.
Well, great question, Kevin. There's a number of policies and programs that if we release, as we say, 15% of some of the Crown holdings, it will give supply to be built, including property, not just existing buildings. We've seen that even here in Ottawa with the release of Crown land from the old Uplands Air Force Base, where there was a number of nonprofit groups on the ground looking at tackling housing issues, affordability issues, and have a project for veterans. So all levels of government need to play a role in fighting the housing crisis. I'm showing the federal government will be a serious partner, not just in giving first-time homebuyers longer mortgage terms, not just by encouraging more rental housing, dedicated, specific, purpose-built rental housing, but also making sure we release some of the holdings of the federal government. We're playing a major role in tackling this crisis. On doit travailler avec les autres paliers du gouvernement sur la crise de logement maintenant. Et on a un plan pour ça avec plusieurs politiques spécifiques sur cette crise, incluant les terres avec le gouvernement fédéral. On doit donner 15% de nos propriétés pour logement et pour une approche nationale contre la crise. On a des autres politiques sur les hypothèques, sur les logements de loyer. On doit travailler ensemble avec les municipalités, avec les provinces, de lutter contre la crise de logement.
I'd like to follow up on one of my colleagues' earlier questions, specifically on your platform proposal to allow doctors to, have a right of conscience to refuse certain medical procedures. I'd like to hear specifically, though, would that apply to abortion? Because if it does, there might be concerns for what you're saying about giving a woman a right to choose. Doesn't that impact their access to service if that is true for doctors to have a right to choose to consciously object from abortion services? Tell me what you think.
Let me repeat again. I'm pro-choice, and we will make sure that women have the ability to make decisions with respect to their health care themselves and make sure that abortion services are available from one coast, from one ocean to the other. And what's interesting about this election is all federal leaders are pro-choice. I've been crystal clear throughout my political career. I will be crystal clear as Prime Minister. I'm here to defend the rights of all Canadians. I'm here to make sure they have a more prosperous future. And I'm here to make sure we tackle the challenges facing our country post-COVID and specific issues with the inflation crisis and the housing crisis. Canada's recovery plan is the solution, led by a leader who's going to bring Canadians together.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Raymond Filion de TVA. Pour poursuivre sur cette question, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire protéger le droit de conscience des professionnels de la santé? Est-ce que ça peut vouloir dire permettre aux professionnels de la santé de refuser des avortements?
Merci Raymond. Comme vous le savez, je suis pro-choix. Je vais toujours défendre les droits des femmes, les droits humains de tous les Canadiens, incluant la communauté LGBTQ. Point final. C'est possible d'avoir une approche équilibrée sur les droits de conscience pour nos infirmières et nos médecins. quand nous sommes en train d'accélérer l'accès à l'aide médicale. Comme vous le savez, je suis pro-choix. Je vais toujours défendre les droits des femmes, les droits humains de tous les Canadiens, incluant la communauté LGBTQ. Point final. C'est possible d'avoir une approche équilibrée sur les droits de conscience pour nos infirmières et nos médecins, particulièrement quand nous sommes en train d'accélérer l'accès à l'aide médicale mobile pour les Canadiens avec les blessures, les maladies mentales. On doit avoir une approche sensible et équilibrée, et on va trouver l'équilibre.
Mais l'équilibre, est-ce que ça veut dire que vous êtes ouvert à permettre aux docteurs, aux médecins, aux infirmières de limiter l'accès à l'avortement? Est-ce que c'est une possibilité?
Comme j'ai dit, je suis pro-choix et tous les chefs de parti dans cette élection sont pro-choix. C'est intéressant. Et comme j'ai dit encore, l'accès à l'avortement est un droit pour les femmes, d'une nation à l'autre. Et ça serait la chose avec moi comme Premier ministre. Je vais défendre ça.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une contradiction, M. O'Toole, entre justement ce qu'il y a dans votre programme? Vous dites que vous allez protéger le droit de conscience des professionnels de la santé. C'est pas clair si ça inclut l'avortement, si des médecins pourraient refuser de donner ces soins-là. Puis en même temps, hier, vous nous avez dit à Québec, je suis pro-choix. Donc, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une contradiction entre votre plateforme et votre discours?
Pas du tout. L'accès à l'avortement est un droit pour les femmes. Point final. Et je vais préserver et protéger ça. C'est possible, comme j'ai dit, avec une augmentation des services pour l'aide médicale à mourir, d'avoir une approche qui va respecter nos infirmières, nos médecins, et on va trouver un équilibre. C'est une approche juste, selon moi, mais je dois être très clair sur les droits humains, incluant l'avortement. Je suis ici pour les droits humains de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, et je vais toujours défendre les droits, incluant sur l'avortement.
Just in English is this a contradiction, please?
This is not at all a contradiction. I think it's very, very important to defend the rights of all Canadians. That's what I will do, making sure that women have the right to access abortion services across this country. I am pro-choice. I have a pro-choice record, and that's how I will be. I think it's also possible to show respect for our nurses, our healthcare professionals, with respect particularly to the expansion of medical assistance in dying, as we're, even as a federal government, studying the expansion into mental health. Let's find an appropriate and a fair balance to make sure those rights are accessed, but we can respect conscience provisions as well.
Puis j'aimerais vous amener sur la question des transferts en santé en deuxième question. Dans votre plateforme, vous parlez d'une augmentation de 6% là, des transferts en santé. En même temps, c'est beaucoup moins que ce que les provinces demandent. Elles demandent une augmentation de 65% en un an. Donc, comment est-ce que ce que vous proposez va répondre aux besoins des provinces?
Merci pour la question. Je vais avoir une approche comme un partenaire. Je vais augmenter les transferts en santé chaque année, sans condition, dans une manière stable et prévisible. Et on va utiliser 6% comme un minimum. Et si on a plus de croissance économique, on va accélérer ça. Mais on a un plan pour une relance économique, la création de richesses pour tous les Canadiens, pour tous les Québécois, et je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences des provinces, et c'est très important d'augmenter les transferts en santé dans une manière juste, prévisible, sans condition, et maintenant, on va utiliser 6% comme un minimum.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Chris Selly from the National Post. Yesterday, you made a very explicit pitch to Quebec nationalist voters, saying that you would respect the constitutional division of powers, unlike Mr. Trudeau, in your view. In theory, would you support other provinces having more control over areas like immigration or culture, or is Quebec unique in your view of the Federation?
After 6 years of Justin Trudeau, our country's more divided than I've ever seen. There's people giving up on our country, which I think is the greatest in the world, in 3 different provinces at a very serious pace. So we have to respect our Constitution, which was always established on federal and provincial jurisdiction, and was always established on the fact that French was a founding language of our country, and there needs to be an examination of respect for maintaining that, including French as the working language in Quebec. I think we can do that. We can also partner with provinces on immigration as well, particularly for skills shortages. We saw that in Alberta and Saskatchewan in years past. Let's make sure we work on that. But protection of the French language and culture is very particular. But I want to be a federalism of partnerships, as I said yesterday in my speech. That means respecting jurisdiction and partnering wherever possible.
You've been very clear, I think, that you would not intervene against Bill 21 as Prime Minister. Your government wouldn't intervene. I just wonder what you would say to a young Muslim or a young Sikh Quebecer who wants to be a teacher or a police officer who's looking for someone to sort of show some leadership on their behalf.
I would say to that person that you're an important part of Canada. And I said that in my first speech as Conservative leader. In fact, I want that person to join our party, to be part of our effort to rebuild the country, get Canada recovered again, Canada's recovery plan. And I personally don't support Bill 21 and would not bring it forward federally. But at a time where our country is becoming more divided than ever before, I will always respect the democratic legislatures of our provinces. And that is an approach of federalism, of building partnerships, not an Ottawa knows best that will fight in court or suggest that they're going to disallow provincial legislation. I think we have to work together, find as many areas that we can work on together. And Canada's recovery plan is about working on getting people back to work, helping highly affected sectors, and tackling the housing crisis, as I said today, is something Mr. Trudeau's ignored. We have an action plan to get 1 million homes built in 3 years, and I look forward to Canadians giving us a mandate to do that. On doit travailler ensemble comme un pays. Après 6 ans de division avec M. Trudeau, il y a des inquiétudes dans l'Ouest particulièrement. On doit travailler ensemble, on doit respecter notre Constitution et les champs des compétences. Et je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences des lois de l'Assemblée nationale et toutes les provinces. Je ne déposerai pas une loi comme ça au fédéral, mais je vais respecter les provinces. C'est une approche, un fédéralisme de partenariat, pas une approche de Ottawa, c'est tout.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Hi, Taylor Blue at Ottawa Citizen. Your campaign platform sets out a vision to have as many federal public servants as possible, given the option to work from home on a permanent basis. What would you say to those businesses that were really built on the in-office presence of public servants and have suffered greatly during this period of remote work and are desperate for public servants to return to work in person?
That's a very important question. Thank you. And it allows me to highlight how we're going to tackle the first pillar of Canada's recovery plan. Those businesses in downtown Toronto, in the PATH system in Toronto, downtown where I used to work as a lawyer, they're devastated. So we're actually going to target specific help to them, the highly impacted sectors in hospitality. We're going to actually give them additional assistance. We're going to give job boost and loans to make sure they provide. And I think we all know that life will slowly get back to normal post-COVID, and there will be probably more work-life balance in office, from home. We want to give our civil service, who are professional and kept things moving through the pandemic, the flexibility to make those choices in a way that's safe and effective, and also help the businesses survive to thrive. And I know as we get through this time, we can find that balance.
And if your party forms government, would you support Ottawa's vision to financially, with federal investment, to extend light rail transit into suburban neighborhoods, particularly if the public service they're no longer required to leave their homes to go into work?
We're going to try and have investments in infrastructure that take a partnership approach. Again, our approach of partnering as a federal partner, not dictating like Mr. Trudeau. That includes priorities for provinces and municipalities on transit. And as I said today, as part of our commitment to tackle the housing crisis, we want our investments in transit and in this type of critical infrastructure to also see increased density. Because we need to tackle the housing crisis. We need to get that 1 million homes built. We need more supply. And our federal investments partnering in transit, we want to see density to be part of that. So it's a way of collaborating. We need to bring people together, and that's what Canada's Recovery Plan and the Conservative Party is offering.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Thank you very much. I'm going to go play road hockey now.
De façon locale dans 501 bureaux partout à travers le pays, et ce, tout au long de l'élection. Je tiens à préciser que notre site Web offre un large éventail de renseignements et de services, et donc j'encourage les électeurs à visiter élection.ca pour obtenir toute l'information dont ils ont besoin, soit pour s'inscrire, soit pour voter. Alors, bien entendu, la COVID-19 va avoir une incidence sur la conduite de l'élection. Depuis des mois, on consulte les autorités de santé publique de tout le pays, tant au niveau fédéral, provincial et territorial, pour nous assurer d'offrir nos services dans un environnement qui est sécuritaire pour tous. On a pris une série de mesures pour assurer la sécurité dans nos bureaux locaux, de même que dans tous les bureaux de vote, que ce soit au vote par anticipation ou le jour du scrutin. Cela inclut, par exemple, et ce sont des choses qui nous sont maintenant bien familières, le port du masque, la distanciation physique, l'utilisation de barrières physiques et de crayons à usage unique. Les électeurs peuvent, s'ils le préfèrent, apporter leur propre crayon ou leur propre stylo. On va continuer au besoin d'ajuster nos mesures en fonction de l'évolution de la COVID-19 et des recommandations des autorités de santé publique. Alors, c'est important de mentionner que les lieux de vote des électeurs pourraient fort bien être différents de ceux auxquels ils sont habitués. Plusieurs des lieux de vote habituels ne seront pas disponibles en raison de la pandémie. Et donc, certains lieux pourraient être situés soit plus loin, soit dans un endroit moins usuel, ou encore ne pas rencontrer tous nos critères d'accessibilité. Alors, les électeurs devront consulter leur carte d'information de l'électeur pour connaître l'adresse exacte du bureau de vote par anticipation et de leur bureau de scrutin le jour de l'élection. Ils devront aussi vérifier s'ils ont des besoins en matière d'accessibilité, si leur lieu de scrutin répond à ces besoins-là, et si ce n'est pas le cas, de communiquer avec nous pour s'assurer qu'on leur trouve une façon de voter qui convient à leurs circonstances. Les cartes d'information de l'électeur devraient arriver dans les foyers au début du mois de septembre. Cela dit, la manière la plus simple et la plus facile de voter demeure le vote en personne, que ce soit à un bureau d'Élections Canada, à un bureau de vote par anticipation ou un bureau de scrutin le jour de l'élection. I'll now turn to English. For those electors who prefer to vote by mail, this option will also be available. This is not a new option. In fact, Canadians have been voting by mail, even locally, since 1993. Electors who want to vote by mail should plan to do so early. They should leave enough time for their voter kit to get to them and for them to return it to Elections Canada by Elections Day. They can apply by providing proof of identity and address to our online application system. This is the fastest way to receive a kit, and voters can check online to see if their kit has been issued once they've applied, or if their ballot, once completed, has been received. For those who are not able to apply online, we will have traditional mail-in forms available. Electors who vote by mail are responsible for ensuring that their ballot is returned in time. They should check Canada Post schedules for their region. If they are concerned about their ballot not arriving in time, they can bring it to their polling station on election day, or they can have a friend or neighbor bring it. The important thing is that it is brought at a polling station within their electoral district. It's also important to note that by law, electors who apply to vote by mail cannot simply change their mind later on and vote another way. If they have a problem with their kit, if they have not received their kit, they should contact us, and again, we'll find a way to make sure that they can vote, but they cannot simply change their mind. So I encourage electors to plan early and choose the voting option that works best for them. Now, I know that Canadians are used to getting complete results on election night, but it will be different for this election. The count of regular ballots on ordinary polling day and advance polls will be completed on the night of the election as usual. However, the count of mail-in ballots will start after Election Day once all the mail-in ballots that electors have dropped off at polling stations have been returned and integrity checks have been performed. If the volume of mail-in ballots is high, as we've seen in other jurisdictions during the pandemic, it will take longer for returning officers to count those ballots. In most locations, this should be done within 2 days, but in some districts, it could take as long as 5 days, depending on the volume and the distribution. In all cases, the vote can be observed, the count can be observed by candidates from beginning to end, from candidate representatives, and daily result updates will be published. With the changes to the process, getting accurate information about the election has never been so important. Canadians can do their part. By registering and updating your information, you are making sure that you will get a voter information card that will tell you everything you know about where and when to vote. So make sure that you are registered and check to confirm that your information is accurate by visiting elections.ca. Our website also remains your destination for accurate information about the electoral process, including all the safeguards that we have in place to protect the integrity and the safety of the vote. I'd like to end today with a message about supporting electoral democracy. Often this is something that we take for granted, which is perhaps a testimony to the high level of trust that Canadians have in their electoral process. And that's something that we can be proud of, but it's also something that needs to be supported. I invite anyone who wishes to support our electoral process, or is just curious to see how it's done, to come experience an election from the inside just one day. So come and work for us. Be one of more than 200,000 Canadians who work for federal elections to make them a reality. I encourage everyone to take advantage of the election, to get involved, and to vote. Thank you, and I will now answer questions.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. We will start this time with a reporter in the room before moving on to the teleconference. I rappelle une question et une question de suivi. One question, one follow-up, please, and if we have time, we will start the queue over.
Thank you. It's Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. You had mentioned before the campaign was official that it could cost more than the usual amount, but now that we're actually into a campaign, can you provide an update on what our election normally costs, what's the latest revision, and what are the drivers of those extra costs?
The cost of elections varies based on a number of factors, including the number of voters, of course, that evolves from election to election. The last election was just over 500, I think it was $506 million. At this point, we estimate that it'll be around $610 million. This is a very unique election. All elections have things that are somewhat unpredictable, so things may change. So I caution about that number. It may evolve depending on the circumstances and things we need to address. But at this point, $612 million is the estimate.
And I'm sure you've seen in the news there's a lot of debate right now about whether federal public servants whether there should be a mandatory requirement to be vaccinated. Are you imposing any kind of mandatory vaccine order on Elections Canada workers just to campaign, and if not, why not?
So the measures that we have in place reflect consultations that we had over the last year and continue to have with public health authorities at all levels. These recommendations do not include mandatory vaccination, whether they be for electors, for workers, or candidate representatives. In the next 3 weeks or so, returning officers will be hiring some 250,000 Canadians to work at the polls to serve approximately 18 million Canadians. These are the same Canadians, these are the same people that you meet every day at the grocery store. The difference is that the polls are a controlled environment where safety measures can be applied more rigorously. And if you look back at the last 18 months, we've had elections in Canada provincially, we've had territorial elections, there have been elections around the world, and there has not been outbreaks of COVID as a result of in-person voting. And that, to me, is a testimony of the fact that polling places are a controlled environment where we can apply safety measures in a way that is rigorous and ensure the safety of everyone present in those polls. Of course, we will continue to follow the advice and continue to consult with public health authorities, and we will adjust our measures based on their recommendations.
Operator, we can take questions from the teleconference now. On peut passer à la téléconférence.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our first question, Tom Korski, Blacklock's reporter. Your line is open. Actually, they are no longer on the line. So our first question will be Julie Gordon, Reuters. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for taking our questions. You basically answered what I was looking for, but maybe you could give us a bit more color on, I'm interested in the counting of the mail-in ballots and how you're going to be verifying those. Can you give us a little more detail on that verification process and why that could take up to 5 days?
The verification process will not take up to 5 days. That should be done the day after. Essentially, we are verifying the outer envelope, and there's more technical information available on our website, but essentially we are verifying the information on the outer envelope, which includes a signed declaration by the elector, includes a barcode, and includes the address information to make sure it is the voting kit that we sent to that elector. We're also going to verify that that person is not voted in person. So if somebody walks up on polling day and said, I did not receive my mail-in kit, that person will swear an oath to that effect and will be allowed to vote in person. We will be able to check to make sure that that is true and set aside any outer envelope from the mail-in ballots that matches the voters' information at the polls. So there's a number of controls that take place to make sure we have the postal ballot from the right person and that the person has not voted twice.
Okay, and so then just to clarify, the count takes 5 days, up to 5 days, just based upon the volume of mail-in ballots in a given riding?
Yes, it's important to note that the count is done locally for local electors. So people who vote by mail, electors who vote by mail from their electoral district, their kit will be sent back to their returning office, and that reduces the travel time for the kits and ensures that we minimize the risk of mail-in kits arriving too late. So they're counted locally, and depending on the distribution, we may see more mail-in kits in some districts than others.
Thank you. Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, Joan Bryden, The Canadian Press. Your line is open. À vous la parole. Joan Bryden, your line is open. If you're using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset and mute your line.
I was actually wanting to ask you again about the why not mandatory vaccination.
Let me repeat the answer that I gave earlier. As I said, we are applying safety measures that have been discussed with public health authorities across the country at all levels, and will continue to adjust those measures. The recommendations so far do not include making vaccination mandatory. And as I indicated, we are recruiting ordinary Canadians, serving ordinary Canadians, and they will encounter them in locations that are highly controlled, much more controls than the kind of encounters you see at the grocery store every day. So we have good reason, and I think Dr. Tam was quite clear when she spoke not very long ago, I think it was less than a week ago, that it is perfectly safe to vote at a polling place if the proper measures are in place, and that's what we're focusing on.
Is there a follow-up?
A polling place if the proper measures are yes. In place. Hi. That's what we're focusing on. I was wondering then if you could. You said that thus far you're not getting recommendation to require mandatory vaccinations. Might you then do that, and how difficult would that be? Sort of midway through a campaign, when you're recruiting poll workers, to then say, "Oops, you all need to be fully vaccinated."
Yes, obviously it becomes more challenging as we go forward. However, vaccination rates are high, and we have every reason to think that our poll workers will be at least as vaccinated as the general population. So a large number of the poll workers will, in fact, be vaccinated.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, Evan Dyer, CBC. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Hi, good morning. I wonder if you could just talk about some of the natural hazards and obstacles to voting, such as floods, wildfires, and so on. For example, the wildfire situation in BC right now. What provisions would you anticipate making if wildfires drove people to evacuate their homes, for example, move to a new riding? What kinds of things could you do or have you done in the past?
So this is something that, unfortunately, we do encounter practically at every election, whether it's floodings or storms or fires. We obviously follow that very closely across the country and monitor the evolution of fires or other national disasters, and look at where people are being evacuated where that's the case. There's a range of measures that we can take and we've taken in the past, and that includes, for example, at the last election in Manitoba, we had a special polling locations for people who are evacuated in Winnipeg. And so it's relatively easy to do, especially when people are evacuated in a particular hotel or area where they're all present and they can vote from outside their district in a manner that really resembles what they would do in their home district. Otherwise, we can use vote by mail. So we're in contact with the authorities, and we follow what's happening. And as the situation evolves in the election, we'll adapt services to make sure that there are voting options for every Canadian.
Thanks. And you also are conducting this election with a new federal law bill, well, it was Bill C-30, now federal law, on disinformation, deliberate attempts to mislead the electorate. How many people or what kind of resources, if any, are you devoting during the campaign to looking for violations of that law? Or is this sort of a complaints-based system? Is it something that you only look at after the voting is done? Can you just talk about how that new law has affected your operations in practice?
So the provision is a variation on a provision that existed in the past. There's an element of intent that was clarified in the legislation, but certainly the provision is not entirely new, and it captures a very specific number of instances of disinformation that is prohibited, including disinformation on certain aspects of the party leaders. This is essentially, as you indicated, a complaints-based process, and the complaints should be made to the Commissioner of Canada Elections. The Commissioner is responsible for investigating violations of the Act, and he does so independently from the Chief Electoral Officer. So if people have instances that they believe is in violation of that provision, they should inform the Commissioner.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question, la prochaine question, Tom Perry, CBC News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just trying to figure out if you could sort of paint a picture what it's going to look like for Canadians who do go to the polls on voting day. What's going to be different for them compared to previous elections?
At the poll itself, they can expect to see essentially the kind of measures that they now have been seeing for the last 18 months. So we will have people in charge of ensuring that the place is clean, that the electors are properly distanced. They will see, for example, these physical transparent barriers that will separate the poll workers that will service them to allow them to vote. There will be masks. If Canadians do not have a mask, we will offer a mask. We've purchased a very, very large number of masks. And, of course, hand sanitizing lotions and disposable pencils. And as I indicated earlier, anyone who wants to bring their pen or pencil is welcome to do that. So basically what they will see is the same kind of measures that you would have seen in a grocery store, but in a very controlled environment. And so that is an important aspect of the safety of the in-person voting.
Just from a security point of view, given the number of mail-in ballots that you're anticipating in this election, what measures are you putting in place to ensure that we don't see people voting, say, by mail-in, but also trying to cast a ballot on voting day?
Yeah, so when an elector applies to vote by mail, their name is automatically struck off the list. So the lists that are used on polling day or advanced polls have names that are struck, and these are people who've requested a voting kit. If somebody wishes to vote on polling day and their name is struck, they'll have to explain why, and if they've lost their ballot, if it's been misplaced, or if they've not received it, then they will swear an oath, and they will be marked as having voted in person and as having received a special ballot. These records will then be used the next day to verify against all of the mail-in ballots that we do not have either two mail-in ballots by a single person or a mail-in ballot by someone who has voted in person. So these controls are made after polling day in the presence of candidate representatives, and that's why we're taking the time in this election, because of the volumes, to make sure it's done properly with observers present.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question. La prochaine question, Ray Chan from Sing Tao Daily. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, and you just mentioned that there will be a much more higher percentage of mail-in voting. Can you specific how many percentage in the past and what prediction in this election?
So we have been conducting surveys over the last year. For most of the year, the survey results we've been getting are fairly consistent at between 4 and 5 million. Just before the call of the election, the number was lower. It was between 2 and 3 million. I expect this could go back up again, so it's not entirely predictable. But we have kits for more than 5 million voters. That's for sure. In the past, just by way of comparison, we would get approximately 50,000 electors nationally, 50,000 who would vote locally by mail. So it's quite a dramatic change. We've had to, of course, increase our capacity quite significantly to deal with such an increase in postal voting.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up?
That's okay. Thanks a lot.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. Our next question, Tom Korski from Blacklock's Reporter. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Perrault. Are you laying out more than 4 advanced polls?
I'm sorry, I misheard that question.
I beg your pardon. Are you laying out more than 4 advanced polls?
So there are 4 days of advanced polls that are provided in the legislation, and that's the service that we'll be offering. If I understood your question correctly. So it's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of the weekend that precedes polling day.
So it's statutory then. My other question, I want to clarify, I'm not looking for trouble, but I want to clarify the mask business. Your authorities make it clear that local health authority rules would apply. but I'm not going to a liquor store. I'm exercising my franchise. I understand there will be free masks and everyone is reasonable. But if I have asthma or I'm a civil libertarian, whatever, I cannot be denied, and you will not deny me my ballot if I choose not to be masked and I'm 6 feet away from everyone else, correct?
Well, you have to be careful here. I think electors have a responsibility, whether it's by personal choice or even for medical reasons. Now, there are medical exemptions, but they should plan their vote. And if you do not intend to vote with a mask, I would encourage you to vote by mail. Now, if you have a medical exception and you've not been able to vote with a mask, to vote by mail, in advance, and you have a medical reason not to wear a mask, then you will not be denied the right to vote. But if it's just a matter of personal choice and the mask is mandatory in the jurisdiction in which you're voting, then we will apply those rules.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, our next question, Raphaël Perrault, Agence QMI. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. Je voulais savoir, peut-être que c'est pas à vous de répondre à cette question-là nécessairement, mais je voulais savoir, en raison de la pandémie, est-ce que vous attendez à recevoir au total, que ce soit en personne, que ce soit par la poste, est-ce que vous attendez à recevoir moins de votes qu'à l'habitude?
C'est une question qui est très difficile à répondre. Effectivement, nous, notre rôle, c'est de s'assurer que les gens aient des opportunités de voter, qu'on offre des occasions de voter qui soient sécuritaires. Pour ce qui est de la participation, du taux de participation, évidemment, on la souhaite toujours élevé, mais ça dépend de bien des facteurs, et la plupart de ces facteurs-là sont de nature politique. Donc, la motivation des électeurs à voter, ce n'est pas quelque chose qui est vraiment du ressort d'administration électorale. Nous, notre rôle, c'est de s'assurer qu'on a des mécanismes qui sont accessibles, qui sont bien compris pour permettre aux gens de voter. Alors, on a vu au fil des ans des taux variés. On a vu dans la dernière année, il y a eu des élections. Dans certains cas, ça a été un peu moins qu'à l'habitude. Mais c'est très difficile, même après le coup, d'identifier là, un facteur pour expliquer la participation.
D'accord. Et donc, si j'ai bien compris, là, pour changer de sujet, il me semble que j'ai entendu pendant le brefage tantôt que c'était difficile d'aller recruter des gens pour l'élection actuelle. Il y aurait des difficultés à ce niveau-là. Peut-être que, je ne sais pas si vous pouvez confirmer ça, expliquer un peu pourquoi, si c'est le cas.
Écoutez, on est au début du recrutement. Ce que je peux dire, c'est qu'on a besoin, dans la dernière élection, on recherchait à avoir autour de 250 000 personnes. C'est le cas aussi cette fois-ci. La dernière fois, on a réussi à en recruter 232 000. Donc, c'est toujours un défi, évidemment, dans une courte période. À l'absence d'une élection à date fixe, on ne peut pas recruter à l'avance, les gens ne sachant pas quel jour ils seraient demandés pour venir travailler. Et donc, ce sont des facteurs qui, on peut s'attendre à certains défis, mais on va voir au fil des prochains jours, des semaines, comment va le recrutement. Encore là, comme je l'ai dit, j'invite tous les Canadiens à prendre une journée. Je pense que c'est une très belle expérience de prendre une journée pour contribuer à la démocratie. Évidemment, il y a rémunération en plus, mais de voir comment ça se passe, je pense que c'est une expérience unique et ceux qui veulent participer, n'hésitez pas à communiquer avec nous. On a certainement du travail pour vous.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Merci. Thank you. Our next question, Sarah Turnbull, CTV News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Hi there. Will the cost of rapid test kits be considered a campaign expense that will count against a candidate's spending cap?
So campaigns that purchase kits or protective equipment, these are material that are expenses under the Act. They are reimbursable, but they are subject to the overall limit for candidates and political parties. So it is a reimbursable election expense if it is used during the campaign as part of the campaign activities.
Thanks.
Was there a follow-up?
No, thanks.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, Karina Roman, CBC News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, hello. I just want to clarify numbers. When you talk about how many special mail-in ballots we've had before locally versus what you're expecting now, that didn't include that 50,000 you quoted. That didn't include, people out of the country and Canadian Armed Forces and prisoners, right? Because the number we got in the technical briefing was different. I just want to be very clear about what the number is in terms of a normal election versus now, not just local versus local.
Yeah, so overall the number, I'm looking at my colleague, is around 250,000, something like that. That includes some 35,000 Canadians abroad, and of course military and a range of other special ballots, national electors who are voting away from their electoral district. So the 50,000 figure that I gave was only for electors who are in their electoral district and vote by mail. Michel?
I will clarify. 50,000 electors is the total number of electors who voted by mail. So it does include an estimate of 5,000 who voted inside their electoral districts, but the vast majority were expat voters or absentee electors outside of their electoral districts. But those are those who voted by mail. The vast majority of electors who voted by special ballot at the last election did vote in person at points of services for Elections Canada. The current election will be different. We'll have more vote by mails.
Okay, so the global figure is actually 50,000, and now we're expecting millions. Just to clarify, that's not my follow-up, but.
Yeah, so postal ballots are a species of what we call special ballots, and they're used for different categories of electors, including, as you mentioned, the military, for example. So as Mr. Husset explained, 50 includes all mail-in, which included 5,000 local mail-in, and the balance is either national or 35,000 from abroad. That's the figure at the last election.
Okay, thank you. So my follow-up question is, since it's going to take some time to count these quite a few more million that you're expecting, what is your thoughts on the impact that will mean on when we might know who a winner is?
Well, again, there's a fair amount of uncertainty. As I said, first of all, in terms of the total number, our surveys have varied between 2 to 3 million to 4 and 5 million, so that's different. It depends on the distribution. These votes will not necessarily be distributed equally amongst electoral districts, so that will impact the duration of the counting process. And finally, the margin of victory will be a key factor. If it's a very tight race and there's a large number of postal ballots, then it can take a few days to find out who's the actual winner.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question, David Common. Please state your media and go ahead with your question. À vous la parole.
Yes, thank you very much. It's David Common with CBC News. Mr. Perrault, I just, given that this is not your first go-around with an election, when you list off the various changes and measures that you had to take place for this election, can you put that in context about how this election will be different from all those others that you've known?
Well, I would say every election is unique in a number of ways, but this one may be a bit more unique than others. I mean, the first thing that stands out, of course, is the postal vote, which we haven't known in such large numbers in the past. We do expect whatever the number to be significantly larger than before. And that also impacts the count. I think for Canadians, having final results in all electoral districts on the night of the election is something that they're used to. So that's a very different experience for Canadians if that's not the case in a number of electoral districts. And the other thing I would mention from the point of view of electors, it's the polling locations. At this point, we are in the process of finalizing the polling locations. Returning officers have been working extremely hard across the country to find proper polling locations, but we know that it's not easy, and we know that some locations will be farther away. We know that some locations will not be the usual ones or may not be accessible. So these are unfortunate circumstances, but we will do everything that we can to make the vote as accessible as is possible. So that's an illustration of some of the challenges we'll be facing that are perhaps unique in this election.
And Mr. Perrault, in terms of the count, a number of my colleagues are asking about that, but given that you could have somewhere in the order of 1 out of every 4 ballots cast being sent to the central office, what measures do you have to take differently this year, this election, in order to count them?
Just want to clarify, because it's an important point, that the vast majority of the postal votes will not go to the central place in Ottawa. They will be sent locally. So any elector voting in their electoral district by mail, their ballot will be issued locally and returned to the local returning officer or brought back at the poll, as the case may be. But the local aspect is important because it does reduce significantly the travel time for the kits to go back and forth to the elector and back to returning officers in order to reduce the number of votes that arrive late. Now, in terms of answering directly your questions, certainly the returning officers and their teams have had to look at larger locations to store the kits, to have counting processes in the kits, counting process after Election Day, and this will be a new experience for them, counting such large numbers locally in the presence of candidate representatives.
Merci. Prochaine question. Thank you. Next question.
Once again, please press star 1 if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our next question, Andy Saint-André, TVA Nouvelle. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour M. Perrault. J'aimerais vous entendre en français un petit peu. Désolé, je risque de vous faire répéter parce que vous avez répondu en anglais. Là. Essentiellement, au niveau du vote par la poste, comment vous allez vous assurer que les Canadiens vont seulement voter une fois, c'est-à-dire que certains ne seront pas en mesure finalement de déjouer le processus en place, de voter par la poste, se rendre aussi dans un bureau de vote le jour de l'élection?
Oui, alors c'est une bonne question, c'est une question importante et les gens doivent être confiants qu'on a les contrôles en place pour éviter ça. Alors, l'électeur qui demande une trousse de vote par la poste va, lors de la demande, lorsqu'elle est reçue, va avoir son nom qui est rayé. Et donc, sur les listes qui apparaissent soit au vote par anticipation, soit au vote régulier, chaque électeur qui a demandé une trousse va avoir le nom rayé. Il se peut qu'un électeur se présente et dise qu'il n'a pas reçu ou que sa trousse a été détruite. Alors, il y a des circonstances exceptionnelles et on va donc permettre à cet électeur-là de prêter serment à l'effet qu'il n'a pas déjà voté et de lui permettre de voter en personne. Mais on va, le lendemain de l'élection, c'est là que le dépouillement va se faire et pour cette raison-là, du vote postal, on va être en mesure de comparer les enveloppes reçues avec les noms qui apparaissent comme étant rayés sur la liste et les gens qui ont prêté serment comme n'ayant pas voté 2 fois. Donc, il y a tout un travail de contre-vérification qui est fait avant même de procéder au dépouillement. Et s'il y a des enveloppes qui sont identifiées comme parvenant d'électeurs qui ont déjà voté, alors ces enveloppes-là vont être écartées et mises de côté. Et ça, c'est un processus qui se fait le lendemain de l'élection en présence des représentants des candidats. Donc, on s'assure qu'il y aura une présence, une observation possible par les candidats pour tout le processus, y incluant la vérification pour les cas possibles de double vote.
Parfait. Est-ce que je peux y aller avec une sous-question?
Bien sûr.
Génial. Un petit peu dans la même veine, vous avez dit tout à l'heure 2 à 5 jours, là, de ce que j'ai compris en tout cas en anglais, 2 à 5 jours pour compter les votes par correspondance. Ça sera double vérifié, triple vérifié, j'imagine. Donc, les gens, inévitablement, ne doivent pas s'attendre à un résultat comme ça le soir même là, du jour de l'élection. Ça prendra des jours par la suite pour vraiment confirmer le gouvernement qui sera en place. Vous avez parlé tout à l'heure des endroits qui étaient difficiles à trouver et qu'on planche l'actu actuellement. Ça pourrait être assez éloigné. Est-ce que vous êtes quand même confiant d'en trouver suffisamment et que les gens vont se déplacer ou vous misez vraiment par la poste? Quel est, disons, le pourcentage, là, pour simplifier ma question, de gens que vous pensez qui vont voter par la poste versus les gens qui vont se déplacer?
Alors, je peux vous dire là, qu'à date, sur 16 000 lieux de scrutin, approximativement, on a 12 000 qui sont confirmés. On est satisfait là, on va pouvoir avoir des lieux qu'on connaît. Sur le 4 000, on a des lieux alternatifs d'identifier qui sont en train d'être identifiés. Donc, on a quand même un bon travail qui a été fait par les directeurs de scrutin. Dans bien des cas, ça va être les mêmes lieux qu'à l'habitude, mais pas toujours. Et donc, il se peut, dans certains cas, que ça soit plus loin ou dans des endroits qui pourraient paraître inhabituels, comme un hôtel, par exemple, une salle de réunion dans un hôtel. Donc, les gens doivent se familiariser avec cette information-là quand ils reçoivent leur carte d'information d'électeur, s'assurer que ce lieu-là convient pour eux. S'il y a des enjeux d'accessibilité, qu'ils examinent ça attentivement pour qu'ils puissent voter de la bonne façon. Et si ça convient pas pour eux, il y a des possibilités des fois de certificat de transfert, mais on peut aussi voter par la poste. Donc, les électeurs devront porter attention, à l'information qu'ils reçoivent sur leur carte d'information de l'électeur.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. The last question, Cormac McSweeney, City News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, I'm just wondering if you could confirm what happens if somebody does decide to vote twice. They send in a mail-in ballot and then they show up in person. Are both of those ballots then, spoiled ballots and destroyed and not counted? And what is the consequence for somebody who purposely decides to do that? Are there penalties that they will face as a result?
Yes. So two things. Once the regular ballot is in the ballot box, of course, you can't trace it back to the elector, but that person's name has been struck from the list, which is why we're retaining all the postal ballots where there's an outer envelope that we can match to the elector and set that envelope aside if the elector is struck from the list as having voted. So the vote that will be set aside will be the postal vote, and any instance of double vote will be referred to the Commissioner of Canada Elections for his consideration and investigation. There are serious offences under the Act for attempting to vote twice.
And you're expecting millions of people to vote by mail this time. You say, electors should use the appropriate time frame to make sure that it's in on election day so that it can be counted. Do you have any timeline for that? If people are listening right now, this may be the only time they really pay attention to this. So how far in advance should they be sending this in via mail? Are you talking 7 days, 10 days? What would be an appropriate time frame to make sure that it does get in and it does get counted?
So I think thank you for that question. The deadline, if you're voting from outside of your electoral district, is it has to be back in Ottawa at 6 o'clock on polling day. If you're casting your ballot by mail in your electoral district, it has to be in by close of polls at the local returning office or brought to any polling location on polling day in your electoral district. So an elector who has doubt, they've got their special ballot kit, they've received it, but it's late in the campaign, they should check, first of all, Canada Post. They have information about schedules. And of course, the time it takes will vary depending on where you are in Canada. It's a very, as we all know, very vast country, and so it can vary significantly. So take the time to check what is the approximate time, and if you fear that it is too tight, then a good option for you is to bring it either directly to the office of the returning officer or wait on polling day to bring it to a local polling station anywhere in your electoral district, and you can ask a friend or relative to bring it for you.
Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.